I honestly believe that everything in life comes at a cost, and it just depends whether you're willing to pay whatever the price is. So if we go back to talking about the guy from AliExpress or whatever, the cost that he regrets paying is time with his family and kids. Often in professional sports, it's very well known that the cost is not being able to socialize with your friends. You can't go out partying and drinking. The price I had to pay was moving countries, living in relatively poor conditions in Brazil, and that I was willing to pay that price.
You're listening to another episode of Success with Purpose, where we hold conversations with the most holistically successful people we have the opportunity to connect with. We explore their journeys, their life-changing events, their perspectives, their mindset, and most importantly, their purpose. I'm Harry Goldberg, host, interviewer, and interrogator of this podcast. Father of the most incredible daughter in the world, husband of an incredible woman, and director and empowerment coach at Purpose Advisory. Hope you enjoy this episode, and don't forget to subscribe and like below. Now, let's begin. All right, so here's what I love about your story. When you were in your late teens, you were the opposite of almost any definition of success. You dropped out of high school, dabbled in martial arts, didn't do much at all, really. But then in your mid-20s, you started Brazilian Jiu Jitsu. You decided to find the Harvard of BJJ schools, which was Alliance, and moved to Brazil. You lived there for a while, became the first and still only Australian black belt under Fabio Gurgel. And at the time, you were the only non-South American to teach at the Alliance HQ in Brazil, which is awesome. You compete in Pans and Brazilian Nationals, which are ridiculously high standards of the sport. And then you opened your Alliance gym here in Sydney in 2018. 2 years later, COVID happened, but you still had the majority of your members continuing to support the gym by paying some of or all of their memberships, despite social distancing rules, meaning we can't do anything. The gym's now stronger than ever, and I certainly feel privileged to be training under you for, I think it's been 2.5 years now.
Yeah.
On top of all of that, you're a proud dad, you're a husband, and a leader of a really cool community.
What an intro, Harry. Thank you.
What an intro. How do you define success?
Yeah, I think it's quite a good question. For me, I mean, it depends, like, successful at what, right? Like, if we're talking about jiu-jitsu, what's the definition of success in my case of jiu-jitsu was being able for it to be my career and job. But I mean, obviously we're going to talk a lot about jiu-jitsu and what that means for me. Like, that's my whole profession and my career, and it's kind of the only thing I know. But honestly, for me to truly give you my honest answer to that question, it's unfortunately going to be super cliche, really, which that's going to sound so lame. but for me, my definition of success is actually it's cringe just saying it, but it's just happiness. Like, I'm not very financially driven at all. It's a very common butting heads point for my wife and I. not that she's like only cares about money, but obviously you get older, you have a family, you have kids, things start mattering, like whether you want to buy a home or get a new car, or what school are you going to send your kids to. And even if you don't care about material things or money at all, money is required to do any of those things. But yeah, like, so I'm not saying my wife is money hungry, but I'm just saying it's not a driving factor for me. And I've always considered success being in direct correlation with being satisfied and being happy. I think one of the best examples of that is I watched an interview with, I forget the guy's name, but the founder of Ali, what is it, AliExpress or Ali, but the eBay.
Jack Ma?
Yeah. I was watching him giving a speech to like a bunch of high school students or uni students or something. And he was essentially asked, oh, if you could go back, would you do it all again? And he was like, no, I wouldn't. He was like, yeah, I'm successful and I'm rich and I'm, famous and whatever. And he goes, man, but I got a wife I never see. He's like, I got kids I never see, and he's like, he goes, I wouldn't do it again. And so a lot of people would look at him and go, that's success, but I don't see, success in what? For me, if you go, so it depends, right? Success in what? Success in jiu-jitsu? Okay, we can talk about that. I have an opinion on that. Success in business, of course. But if you just go, what's the definition of success? I think that's a broader question. And you're going, what's success in life? And then for me, I would say, well, then I'll always take being happy over having money or material things. And so, yeah, I mean, a bit of a cliche answer, I think, but
yeah, well, I mean, and I guess then as well, everyone has their own definition of happiness, right? So how do you define or experience happiness?
Yeah, it's funny as well, because one of my favorite quotes is the whole, money can't buy happiness. My favorite counter argument to that is, well, whoever said money can't buy happiness simply didn't know where to go shopping, and because, how do you, it's funny, you need, and I believe there's been a lot of studies on it, right? That above a certain threshold of money, any more money does not increase your likelihood of happiness. But yeah, I mean, okay, there's things that I wish I had the money to do that would bring me happiness. Like I wish I could just at the drop of a dime be like, oh, I'm going to go snowboarding in Switzerland, or whatever. But the core of what makes me happy, and it kind of goes back to the beginning when you introduced me as, someone who dropping out of high school, which I did, I finished year 10, obviously, and I went back and I did the first term of year 11, and I was like, nah, I'm out. And I had spent, it's not like I was just a complete drop kick. I mean, I spent time looking at different uni courses and what was on offer. And I remember reading from A to Z every single course like that you could do at uni. And I got to the end of the list and I was like, there's nothing here that I would not neck myself doing for the rest of my life. Like there was nothing that I could see myself enjoying doing, And so it was at that point that I really was convinced that I was going to leave school. And so I left school and I just decided to work and make money. And then I did some traveling and stuff and kind of knew by that stage to some degree what I wanted to do. Like I had started training I did some other martial arts when I was like a kid. But in my teens, I started a martial art called Hapkido. It's a Korean martial art. And I really enjoyed it. It is definitely one of those kind of more fake martial art. I split martial arts into two categories. You've got martial arts where it's more about the art, like, Kung Fu and Hapkido and whatever. And then you've got combat sports like jiu-jitsu, boxing, wrestling, Muay Thai, where you actually fight. So yeah, I was a bit ignorant, didn't really know at that stage that it was this sort of more an art and not a combat sport. But I remember enjoying it so much and thinking, man, if you could make a living out of teaching this and whatever this, and then so I kind of knew that's what I wanted to do, but there's no market for it even to today. It's a super niche little martial art that very few people do. But luckily that then turned into discovering jiu-jitsu, and thankfully you can make a living off jiu-jitsu. It's a very long-winded way to say that I put all my eggs in one basket and thought, nah, man, you can make money from jiu-jitsu, teaching jiu-jitsu, owning a gym. I've always enjoyed teaching and sharing knowledge. And so I just went, all in, being like, well, this is what I have to do, and it has to work because I have no backup plan. I don't have like a degree to fall back on. But it was kind of the only thing that I thought, oh, I can actually make money from this. Not being money driven, but obviously everyone's got bills to pay. It's like, I can make money from this and be happy doing it for the rest of my life, So like I said, it's not like I didn't try. I literally read the course A to Z that the unis had on offer and was like, no, there's nothing. So yeah, for me, I guess, yeah, the definition of happiness is that kind of cliche of doing something that, you enjoy doing. Obviously, still there's days I'm like, man, I don't want to go to the gym. I don't want, of course, like you can have the dictionary definition of a dream job. You'll still have days you don't want to do it, of course. But, that's how, I think that's where I get most of my happiness. Of course, there's other things like, my family, my wife, my son, having a dog brings me heaps of happiness, right? There's lots of other things, but as a bigger overarching answer, that would be it.
Yeah, cool. And as you started exploring a lot more of your journey, or you started sharing a lot more of your journey, and so you got to the point where you're doing martial arts and you discovered BJJ. What exposed you to jiu-jitsu as the sport? And then how did you finally dive into that?
So yeah, I went from Hapkido to, I don't know how I got from Hapkido to Muay Thai. I'm not sure how, I can't recall how that transition happened, but I discovered Muay Thai. And so that was the first sort of realization that up until then, I wasn't training a combat sport, I was just training a martial art, which is fine, right? But you just got to be real about it, and you as someone who training jiu-jitsu with me as someone who's also trains a combat sport, you would know there's no replication for actually, having someone tackle you, or no matter how many times you practice, pretending to be tackled or pretending to punch someone or pretending to get hit. I remember that first time I ever actually, because I did 5 years of Hapkido or something and never got punched in the face. And then I did Muay Thai and got punched in the face. And, like 5 years, it did not help for that initial shock. So Muay Thai was the first exposure to, okay, this is actually, a combat sport. And then one of my really good friends who because he trains at the gym as well, Chris, he hasn't been there very often recently. So Chris and I used to live together. We shared an apartment, back when we were early 20s in Sydney. And Chris already trained jiu-jitsu. And then it was through Chris and through through watching the UFC that, and like kind of typical 20-year-old guys getting drunk and wrestling, and Chris just beating the crap out of me, because he trained and I didn't. That's how I discovered jiu-jitsu. And so
there's a significant size difference as well, right?
That's right. Yeah, I'm much bigger than Chris, but yeah, I was still getting wrecked by him. And then I didn't actually. So then I was leaving Australia. I was moving to Canada. And so by that stage, I knew I wanted to do jiu-jitsu because, I did Muay Thai, but I really don't like getting punched and kicked in the head. I don't like getting punched and kicked anywhere. I much prefer the grappling side of jiu-jitsu and the intricate chess game of jiu-jitsu, and it's just a little more friendly on the body. I mean, of course, injuries happen, but compared to not even other combat sports, just compared to other contact sports, the injury risk is relatively low. The people who come off from playing rugby, for example, the amount of shoulder reconstructions and things that you see in rugby, or even, anyway, this is off topic, but yeah. So,
I feel like I've gotten more injuries from jiu-jitsu than I have from boxing. I did boxing for 2 years, and
but
I ended up with a couple of black eyes, but that was about it, right?
Yeah, but even boxing, see, that's a good point. But the thing with boxing as well is you know, what's so good about jiu-jitsu is that you can spar or you can roll at more or less 100% intensity and walk away a lot of the time relatively unscathed. But you can't do that in any striking. Like if you, even with the headgear on and everything, if you spar 100% with, like, I think in jiu-jitsu how we might do, like, all right, we'll do 5-minute rounds. If you did full contact, all out sparring in boxing, 5-minute rounds, you can't do that 5 days a week. No way. Right? If you did, I would argue you're going to have way more injuries in boxing, or you're going to have, you know, you're going to have serious head injuries, you know, and that's going to, what is that, CTE, I think it's called, that that brain injury that like NFL players get a lot, and boxers get from repeated head trauma. Anyway, so then I moved to Canada, and because I knew I wanted
to. Why Canada?
Because at the time, my wife, who wasn't my wife at the time, her visa had expired, and so she had to leave Australia. And I don't know if this is still the case, but back then when I was mid-20s, it's really easy for Australians to get working visas in Canada if you're under 30. So I liked snowboarding, so I was like, we'll go do the typical, you know, and I believe it was relatively easy for her as a Brazilian to get a visa for Canada too. So I was like, okay, we can both get visas for there. I'll just do the classic Australian working holiday in Canada, go to Whistler, go snowboarding, and then I'll finally have time for jiu-jitsu. Because leading up to that, even though I already knew I wanted to do it, I was just working, saving money to move overseas. So I think I even stopped doing Hapkido and Muay Thai because I was working 2 jobs. You know, I worked for a wine company during the day, and then I'd finish work, and then at nighttime I would work at a pizza restaurant, and I just worked to save money. And then so we moved to Canada, and that's where I eventually started training. And I got so addicted, like almost from day one, I was doing 2 classes a day every day. You know, kind of like I just went all in. I got super addicted. And it was at that point I really was like, yeah, man, okay, people, wow, look at this gym. People, this is an actual business, and I'm going all in on this. I got nothing else. Jiu-jitsu is going to be my university. You know, where's the best gym? Okay, at that time, it was, I'm not saying my old gym in Brazil isn't still one of the best, but, you know, the sport has grown and changed. But at that time, it was, yeah, the undisputed, not just best team in the world, but the best gym in the world. You know, it had all the best athletes came out of that gym, the best coaches are in that gym. And so I just went, nah, man, I'm moving there. That's my university. This is what I'm going to do.
Help that your partner was Brazilian either way, right?
That definitely helped. Yeah, it was the whole time I lived in Brazil. So we lived there for 5 years, and when we first moved there, the gym wasn't super gringo friendly. Even though the internet already existed, it wasn't as connected as we are today in 2022. So it wasn't as gringo friendly. And there was really only 2 foreigners that lived there full time and trained full time, which was me and one other guy. And I probably took 4 years until the majority of the gym accepted me as one of their own, because every other foreigner who came through, they only stayed for a short amount of time, and they were like bankrolled by, like, the gym was in quite an expensive area. So you only had 2 types of people training in the gym. You either had really poor people who sacrificed everything to be there, right? So, like, not just saying foreigners, like there were Brazilians there, not a lot of them, but a few who sacrificed everything to train there because it was the best gym. And then you had the complete opposite on the other end of the spectrum, which were people, just really wealthy people training there. So any other foreigners who came through were just sort of cashed up, and they got really warmly welcomed because they were only there for a short amount of time. And whereas me and my other friend Ali were looked as outsiders trying to steal secrets. And so it definitely helped having my wife there, because it at least took a lot of pressure off with visa stuff. And in the beginning, when I didn't speak Portuguese, it helped a lot, and it helped like the first year I didn't work at all. I just trained full time. And then we ran out of money and I had to get a job. But it helped a lot because I know other people who either had to constantly come and go with their 3-month visas, but they had the money, so it wasn't really that much of an issue. But I also know other foreigners who wanted to live there full time, like I did, but couldn't get visas. So yeah, it definitely helped. If I wouldn't have been able to do it if I hadn't met my wife, it wouldn't have been possible because I would have gotten a 3 or 6 month visa, whatever it is, and then it would have expired and back home.
And you must have been like really, really slumming it as well, right? Because you said you're in an expensive area. I think in the past you told me that you were in kind of ridiculous accommodation as well.
Yeah, it was pretty, like, it wasn't like we didn't live in a favela, but we definitely...
slumming it, I meant that as the Australian term, not the Brazilian term.
Yeah, it was... No, but yeah, in the colloquial sense of the word, we were definitely slumming it. We for the first 4 of the 5 years, we lived in I actually have some photos recently that a friend who visited me sent me, but we lived in this, struggle to call it an apartment, a room, I guess you would call it, that was maybe 4 meters by 4 meters, maybe something like that, really small. And that was it. Like, that room had our bed, our wardrobes, our stove, our fridge, our washing machine, everything in that one little box. And then just on the other side of that box was like one little sink with a bench, and then there was the bathroom, and the bathroom was like a 2 meter squared box, and you could literally, I'll show you a photo. You could, like, and this is actually quite common in Brazil, where the shower head is just like over the toilet, like they're just together, right. So it was, it wasn't great. And that was maybe about 5 kilometers away from the gym in a different suburb that was more affordable than where the gym was. But in Sao Paulo, 5 kilometers that could some days take you 2 hours in traffic, 5Ks. Like, it's just ridiculous. So to travel that 5Ks, if I had class at 7 in the morning, I'd pretty much have to catch the 10 to 6 o'clock bus. Like, that's how long it takes. But yeah, luckily the last year we moved to a nicer house. So the last year we had a nice house. On the flip side, we had the physical representation of human trash was our flatmate, unfortunately. So that made it really shit. But we had a nicer house. And we had a dog too. So we had even in the small apartment, we had me, my wife, and our dog. And one time, so this person, JT. So JT came over and stayed. JT, for other people listening, is a old training partner of mine, and he's Australian as well. So he doesn't have long-term visas for Brazil, and he came over to train and stayed with me for, I think it was like 2 or 3 months. So we had me, my wife, JT, and a dog all living in this 4 meter box for months. It was, okay, don't get me wrong. There's people who live in far worse conditions than that. But yeah, it's pretty, compared to the quality of life I have in Australia, wasn't the best. But the training paid off. Right? Yeah, it does, right? But, so I would struggle to think I would ever live back there. But yeah, the training's so good, the jiu-jitsu really good, the people really good, the food really good. There's a lot of amazing things about it. But I don't know. People often talk about that when you travel. It's not until you travel you realize, sort of how good you had it, or you don't know what you got till it's gone.
I think I'm going to have to title this episode the cliche of Adamchilds.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I know. Yeah. God, yeah, I'm a bit cringy.
And so you were there for 5 years. The last year was actually kind of really nice. And it sounds like you're really enjoying it with better accommodation, more space, all that kind of stuff. And your jiu-jitsu was obviously getting a hell of a lot better. Had you done any comps at that stage as well?
Yeah, so I competed the whole time I was there. When I first moved to Brazil, I definitely had the aspirations of going on to become a world champion and everything. Fortunately, not how it worked out for me. So I definitely lent into that if you can't do teach whole thing, you know. Throw another cliche in there. But no, I competed a lot, particularly at blue belt. Don't want to sound like a bit of a wank, but at that time when I was a blue belt, I was definitely one of the best blue belts in the world for sure. Because I think I podiumed like every single competition I did, and when I would do these local competitions, it's not like we have here. Like, you know, when I get the guys at the gym to say, oh, guys, let's go do the Sydney Cup. It's a nice, close local competition. Any other competitions further away, and let's do this one. Man, like, that's a very small amount of people. You know, the local comp in Sao Paulo, you're talking about a state that has 35 million people in it, you know? So, like, I used to do these competitions that were called the Circuito Paulista, which would be like the equivalent of the New South Wales circuit, is what it would translate to. So it was like the circuit for the state. And so they were the comps I would always do. And I podiumed all the time. And then they had this thing where if you had earned enough points through the season, you qualified to fight the selectives at the end of the year. So you first had to qualify to fight this competition at the end of the year. And so I had scored enough points, qualified to fight this competition at the end of the year, which I then won. And winning that competition, the prize was your airline tickets to then go to LA to fight in the PANs, which is one of the you got a few main competitions throughout the year in jiu-jitsu. You've got the Europeans, the PANs, the Brazilian Nationals, and the World Championships. They're the four biggest ones. If you're talking about gi jiu-jitsu, nowadays with no gi, you've got ADCC, so no gi being not wearing the sort of what people refer to as the kimono if they don't know a lot about jiu-jitsu. So you've got the sport's changed a lot since back then, but you know, back then the PANs was definitely one of the biggest competitions. And so I won tickets to go to that. Unfortunately, didn't win it. I got bronze in both my weight division and the absolute division. And unfortunately, that was it was quite funny actually, because at those big competitions, you can't just do absolute. So absolute being the open weight, no restrictions on the weight category. These little local competitions here in Australia, you can just register for absolute. But in those competitions, you have to make it to the podium in your respective weight division to be allowed to do the absolute. So it was quite funny because I unfortunately lost my semi-final match in my weight division, which gave me the bronze medal. And it was in that semi-final match that I blew out my first knee, right? So that was the first injury that happened that it didn't blow out as in I was on the ground screaming in pain, but that's when the first injury happened, which resulted in having surgery at a later date. But losing that semi-final match, I blew out my knee, and I was like, I don't really want to do the absolute division. And so you've only got a certain amount of time to go up to the organizers and say, I made the podium. I'd like to register for the absolute division. So I waited until I knew that the absolute division registration had closed intentionally. And I went up to the desk and I was like, oh, I'd like to register for the absolute. And the organizers are like, oh, registrations have closed. I'm like, oh shit, sorry. So I walk off and I go to Fabio. I'm like, oh, Fabio, I tried to register for the absolute. It's already closed. He's like, oh, don't worry. I put your name down ages ago. I was like, so then I fought the absolute, and I lost the semi-final in that as well, not due to my knee. It was really unfortunate. I actually lost both matches the same way, not to the same person, but the same way. It was well, it's not going to make sense. So I won't say how, because for people who don't train jiu-jitsu, it's not going to make any sense at all. But I unfortunately lost both matches the same way, but via points. And yeah, but anyway, I got bronze in my weight division, then bronze again in the absolute. And then, yeah, like I had all my training partners being dumbfounded as to why I wasn't going to compete in the world championships. Like all my training partners were like, dude, like you're the best blue belt in the world, 100, like you got to go. There's no way you don't win, blah, blah, blah. But I don't know, it just never played out for me. And then I had my first knee surgery not long after that. And then I actually had quite a string of bad luck. So, talking about success and happiness, I definitely had a period of my time in Brazil that was, I definitely had moments of what am I doing here? Why am I doing this? And then kind of feeling backed into a corner because I didn't have a degree to fall back on, because I went from, so I had this first knee injury, and then everyone said to me to try to avoid surgery. So that time I had a sponsored physio. So I had physio like once or twice a week, every week. So I was doing a lot of work to try rehab the knee to avoid surgery. And that essentially, and then while I was doing all that, I still trained, but I couldn't really train properly. There was a lot of problems with my knee. And it was almost like, I think I spent like 9 months trying to rehab it while still sort of so-so training. And it turned out to be a waste of 9 months, because then my knee just eventually fully went to the point where it's like I couldn't even walk. And then there was no choice. Like I needed surgery. And then so I had the surgery, and then rehabbing, then coming back from the surgery, I just had created lots of other problems in my knee. It was a relatively straightforward surgery, but it took a long time to recover from. And then I finally got back to training, and then I was like getting ready to compete again. I think the competition was on a Saturday, and it was my last training. It was like on a Thursday. I was doing my last training, and then my other knee went, and it was like not even like a traumatic thing. It would be the equivalent of if you said I don't know, you were walking along and rolled your ankle, and that turned out to be like you broke your ankle. Like it was a nothing thing. It wasn't really jiu-jitsu related at all. But then my other knee just went, and it went the same way my first one did, where it was fully gone straight away. In the sense that there was no opportunity to even rehab it. Like when it went, it was like what happened to the other knee when I knew I needed surgery. So then I was like, pretty much straight away, I like went and had surgery on that knee. I didn't have a choice, couldn't walk or anything. And then once I finally came back from that surgery, I kid you not, it was like the same thing. It was like it got to a Thursday. So I came back to training that first week. I trained Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. And then on the Thursday morning at like 6 a.m, I was in the hospital with appendicitis. and then, which again, obviously is not jiu-jitsu related, but then that's another surgery, right? I have to have my appendix out. And so I had 3 back-to-back surgeries, and it just like the huge detriment that had to my progression in jiu-jitsu. And, there's so much lost time that I wasn't training, and even when I was training, not training properly. So there was definitely a big period of, man, what am I doing? Like, maybe I just move home and I'll just go back to, working at a supermarket, and that'll just be like, I don't want to, it sounds like I'm taking a dig at people who live that life, because there's nothing wrong with that. That's one of the things that's so awesome about Australia, that you could just work in a supermarket or whatever and still have a family and be happy and put food on the table and everything. It's very different in Brazil. Like in Brazil, it's very, but you really do need to go to uni, get a degree to have a proper job. Because if you're someone who just works at a Woolworths, a supermarket, there's a very good chance you also live in a favela and pretty much, very, very poor. So there were definitely times where I thought, like, man, like, this isn't working. Like, I don't know if I can do this. But I think it was the fact that I didn't have anything else, that I'd come too far, like I had to keep going. And then we came back from my appendicitis and finally back to training and competing. Definitely had lost a bit of that competitive drive that I had when I was younger and pre-injured. I'm not blaming the injuries, I just I don't know, just was different after that. Yeah, I guess maybe that's a good way to put it. I'd lost a bit of momentum, but I was still super happy and with training and enjoying jiu-jitsu, and still committed to opening a gym, because that was always the goal. Even though when I was younger, wanted to go on and become a world champion or whatever, I still knew that the only way you can make money in the sport is teaching. It's changed nowadays. Like nowadays, the competitors win prize money and things like that. And then off winning big competitions, you make a name for yourself so you can sell instructional DVDs and whatever. But if you think about it, that's still also teaching, right? So, if you even with prize money on the table, the people winning prize money, it's not enough. It's typically not enough prize money where they then don't still have to teach seminars or record instructionals or open a gym, right? So I always knew I was going to teach anyway. So even when I had lost a bit of that momentum, I was still committed to moving back to Australia to open a gym. And yeah, that I don't think that ever wavered.
So that was you got injured, your first injury was at blue belt, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, first was a blue, and then my second injury, as well as my appendix, was a purple belt.
Right.
And then I've been relatively actually, I've had multiple surgeries since then, but not due to injuries. Like then I went all through brown belt with no surgeries, and then recently had some more elective surgeries that were actually, one was jiu-jitsu related, but they weren't things that sort of making jiu-jitsu sound pretty rough, but but no, yeah. So that happened. Like, definitely my biggest injury period was at blue and purple belt. But I think that's all. It was when I was training the hardest, competing the most. Any sport that you attempt to do at a professional level, it's going to be very hard on the body. Like, it's not just jiu-jitsu. I mean, look at something that's regarded as, well, that firstly is not contact and regarded as elegant and beautiful. Take ballet, for example. Man, ballerinas destroy their toes, their feet, their ankles, their hips. They wreck their body. So if you were training ballet at a professional level, you'd be full of injuries and surgeries as well, I reckon. So yeah, it's just part of the course, right? It's and for me as well, I don't see the physical toll any more sacrificial than the mental toll that a businessman businesswoman might pay for taking on unnecessary stress or something. Like, say, for example, sometimes I might train or do something in the gym that requires me to push through pain or injury. Like, for example, one time I had another black belt come into the gym while I was injured and shouldn't have been training. And I was just like, oh, like, I think it was quite soon after my elbow surgery. So I just had elbow surgery last year, which was not due to an injury. It was just due to bone spurs, which are when you have like extra bone growth in the joint. So it was too soon to be training since that. But I had this black belt come into the gym. I was like, oh, okay, well, I've got to train with this guy because he's come in to see me, blah, blah, blah. And you might look at that and go, why would you do that? You're putting your body on the line, blah, 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 blah. But how's that any different to, let's say, I don't know, how's it any different to if you're having a super stressful day at work and then it's, 11 p.m. at night and you're already stressed and tired. Oh, I've got to finish this spreadsheet and send this email. And, people do that all the time in desk jobs, and they pay a mental price. That there's a mental toll that comes with that. So I just often pay a physical toll for what I do because it's a physical job,
Yeah. And I mean, I guess in your definition of happiness, it didn't say anything about not being in physical pain.
That's true. Yeah. I actually say to some students when they complain about injuries or sometimes the answer is you're not training enough. I'll tell them, like you're only training and then you're taking a break. As soon as the calluses start to build up, you're taking a break. So then when you come back, like, but there's no more calluses. It's like, man, you kind of just got to, just get on board with the level of pain and discomfort that you just forever feel. But
which, I mean, we grow through the discomfort, right? Like,
yeah,
that's
100%.
I can't think of anything in life which we grow through if it's not challenging while we're doing it.
Yeah, and what's the alternative? Have a herniated disc in your back from sitting in an office chair all day? Or, man, I've even heard bizarre stories of people blowing their neck out from meditating. So, so, there's I mean, whether you do a sport or not, whether you do it at a hobbyist level or a professional level, and as on top of that, as we get older, and shit's going to hurt all the time. I think that's just part of life,
As you get older, everything gets sore. Although I usually hear 60-year-olds talk about that, not people in their 30s.
Yeah, true. Yeah. Well, I mean, I might walk a bit funny now, but I'm pretty good at jiu-jitsu, so it's worth it for me.
To finish off your journey, so you did most of your competing at blue and purple. You went pretty much injury-free for all of brown. You got your black belt while you were still in Brazil?
No, so I had already moved back to Australia then because I was a brown belt, but I worked for Alliance, which is the team that the jiu-jitsu team that I'm from. I worked for Alliance, and the head of Alliance is Fabio Gurgel, who was also my jiu-jitsu coach. So I had a conversation with him saying, look, like I kind of really need to move back home because I need to start taking steps towards opening a gym. Because this whole time I was in Brazil, like at the end of 5 years, financially I had nothing to show for it. Like I didn't even have money to buy plane tickets back home. Like I made no money, even though I was working in Brazil, just the living expenses and the minimum wage and everything. I made no money. So I was like, I needed to start earning dollars, right? So, because even when we moved back here, it took like, I don't know, 2 years of just, I was just working in a cinema. And then majority of the time I worked literally doing swimming pool maintenance, just cleaning swimming pools and stuff like that, just to save money to open the gym. Because like I said, I moved back with nothing. So yeah, I had a conversation with Fabio saying, but will you still be my coach, blah, blah, blah. Because, that's always been the dream to get my black belt from you. And he did remain my coach because I worked with him. I spoke to him almost, not quite every day, but I would speak to him 2 or 3 times a week. And then every year I would fly back to whether it was Brazil or the US, where he was, like, depending where he was, I would go and train with him every year and see him every year, as well as talk to him all the time. So I was very connected with him still, and then got my black belt in 2018. 2018? It's on a certificate in the gym. I think it was 2018. Yes, it was 2018. So then I got my black belt in 2018, which was the same year that that we opened Alliance Sydney here.
Mm.
And that was actually a whole nother. It's probably my. I know for some people it might be very insignificant, but I try. It's easier said than done, but I try not to compare myself to other people and my situation to other people's situations, because it's all relative, right? But for me, opening the gym is probably my biggest accomplishment, I think, because, well, firstly, yeah, it wasn't done alone. It was done with my wife. But, I didn't finish school. I don't have a business degree or anything. And, saving all that capital and then, taking the plunge to do it, and not knowing if it'll work, like I'm not a gambler, right? Like I don't partake in playing the pokies or going to the races or anything. And I don't mess with stocks or crypto because, like it's not like I'm against taking chances, but, like it's scary. And the day before the gym opened, I'm not even making this up, the day before the gym opened, we found out that we were pregnant with Atlas, our son. So it was like, oh man, this has to work now. Like it has to work, because shit, we're going to have a kid in 8 months or whatever, however many weeks we were when we found out. So it was, and I think I'm secretly pretty proud of it, because I think we only ran at a loss. I mean, like you run your own business, you help people run their businesses. So a lot about this, that a lot of small businesses fail in the first 1-2 years. Whether it's a small business or a big business, not many, if any, businesses run at a profit from day one, right? I'm not talking about recouping the investment. I'm not talking about recouping the startup costs, but I mean, just not many businesses from day one cover their overheads. And man, I think we only ran at a loss for the first 3 months. I think. Wow. I think it was either at month 3 or month 4 that I remember I was like, I made $5, and luckily we've never had, obviously things have gone up and down, but we've never since that month had a month where we've taken a loss. And then, so that I think I'm quite secretly proud of. But even more than that was surviving, 2 lockdowns. And the first lockdown happened when the gym was less than 2 years old, so definitely easily a business crushing time, especially with it being a full contact sport and a gym. Gyms got slammed super hard. Okay, I didn't do it all alone. The government did a lot of stimulus packages and stuff, but I think
there were plenty of businesses which went under in that time.
That's right. So I think, and like you mentioned at the start, there was a huge amount of support from the students, but even that was a whole, I actually sometimes get a little bit jaded about how I see sometimes other people, things, businesses do well when they execute it so poorly. Like I'll give you an example. So during the lockdown, there was landlords still charged rent. Commercial landlords still charged rent and everything, but you had no way of generating revenue because you couldn't run your classes. So our approach was what we did was we said to our students, look, we're going to change the product that we sell, right? We no longer sell in-person classes. We sell like Zoom classes, and we're going to have pre-recorded techniques that'll be uploaded. And then once we're allowed to go to the park, we'll do outdoor workouts and all this sort of stuff, right? And then we said to our students, if you want, you can retain your full membership, you can pay a reduced membership, or you can pay no membership, and you're still going to be part of the team, and you're still going to have access to all this content anyway, right? And a lot of people continued to pay. Some people didn't because they lost their jobs, but they still came and did the workouts and everything. And so that helped us be able to pay rent, right, during the time the business was closed. Where this gets to me saying I get a little bit jaded is I know of one gym, which I'm not gonna mention who it is, but there were multiple gyms that through lockdown they just ghosted all their students, like they just went on silent but kept charging them their memberships, right. And just there was no communication about it. I know one gym that said to their student, the student went to him and said, look, I've pretty much lost my job. I can't keep supporting the gym, unfortunately. So I'm going to need to stop the payments. So first off, this gym wasn't offering them anything in compensation while the gym was closed. They were just taking the payments. And the gym said, okay, that's no problem. However, post-lockdown, when you want to come back and train, you're going to be charged a joining fee, and that joining fee will equal the amount of money that you haven't paid during, and I see this shit. I don't know, man. This stuff just like rubs me the wrong way. Like seeing all these poorly executed, or just even morally wrong things, as far as I'm concerned, morally and ethically, like not okay. But they still do really well, and I don't know, it kind of annoys me a little bit. I feel like it's like putting a dark stain on the sport that I love so much. But yeah, surviving COVID was. Yeah, the government helped and the student support was amazing, and I'll be forever grateful for that. And I always try to give back to the students. I think after we came out of lockdown, we did like a big social get together that I catered and everything to try to thank everyone. And yeah, but the gym's now 4 years old, and yeah, it's probably, I guess, together with my wife and creating a family and stuff, but that be the biggest accomplishment.
Yeah, I mean, you did so many things to adjust. It wasn't just those outdoor things. Like sometimes you try and have an outdoor class at nighttime, and then we're going to go to some rugby field, and like, no, this is a private area. And I'm like, gosh,
yeah, that's right. Yeah, we
need to go somewhere else.
Yeah, you were there that time, weren't you? We got kicked. Yeah. We got kicked off this rugby field, and we ended up, and I think it was around about,
the golf course.
Yeah, it was winter-ish, so the sun had set super early, and then the ground was wet, and we were just standing in the middle of a fairway on a golf course working out. It was, and we even did some watch parties in the first lockdown. Like we would all jump on Zoom and watch jiu-jitsu matches and chat about them and stuff. So tried to do a lot to stay.
When the lockdown ended, you still wanted everyone to be able to compete, and there were no competitions on. So you made your own comp for the in-house comp.
Yeah, we did the internal competition, the Pineapple Cup. People, you could win a pineapple. Got another internal competition coming up on Saturday. That's more of a punishment competition, though. Like the Pineapple Cup was hey, there's no competitions because of social distancing. They're not allowed to have that many people in the one venue. Let's do an internal competition. It's also going to be a good way to get the whole team together because we've all been so isolated. Let's do that. And so that was like a reward thing. This upcoming competition, this is punishment for people not doing because regular competitions are back on, and not as many students as I would like are participating in them. So I said, fine, we're going to do an internal competition. Participation's mandatory. but you can win a banana, or rather a bunch of bananas you can win. Worth more than the medals you get at jiu-jitsu competitions. So,
yeah, for sure. And I guess you've had you've had some bigger goals for the gym as well, like getting other teachers in and all that kind of stuff. Some have worked out really well, some not so well, obviously.
Yeah. I mean, I have a lot of plans for the gym and the team. I'm kind of little bit stuck at the moment. I think I'm kind of have only myself to blame because of the standard of teachers and the quality that I want to try and maintain. A lot of gyms, they just go, most of them actually in Australia, to be honest, just flat out go for quantity over quality, and they just open up gyms and have whoever teaching, and it's fine from a growth point of view and a marketing point of view, but from what you're doing to the standard of the sport is absolute. And I try to keep my standards to the standards not only that I was held to, but also the evolving standards of the sport. As the sport grows, the standards get higher. And so it then makes it difficult for me to, be willing to put someone else in to teach, or to open another gym and have someone teach it, because it's hard to find people that are of a high enough standard, And so I definitely don't want to go that route of just giving out belts and whoever can teach this and that, because it's not good for the sport. I'm not even that good at jiu-jitsu, and I've come across so many people that are just not even qualified to be doing what they're doing. So yeah, I'm kind of between a rock and a hard place with that, but yeah, I mean, at the moment I still teach 99% of the classes, but I would like to, I don't know, it'd be nice to teach a little bit less, so I could spend a little bit more time with my family. It would be nice, but you're
not doing like 99% of classes. You're maybe like 90%, and you don't do the
I don't do the kids classes anymore. Yeah,
you've had some progress.
Yeah,
there.
that was a big. I had little. So there's been little sort of milestones. The first milestone was obviously for the gym to make a profit. And then the second milestone was for the gym to pay me a salary. So there's been these little mini milestones, and one of them definitely was me no longer teaching the kids classes. I still teach one kids class a week, and I enjoy teaching the kids classes, but I didn't sacrifice everything I did jiu-jitsu wise to teach kids. Like, I want to teach high level jiu-jitsu. Again, I'm not a world champion, but I definitely come from one of the most prestigious jiu-jitsu schools in the sport. And like me teaching the kids classes, it's just not the best use of my time. It would be like having a Harvard maths professor teach primary school math. It's like, yeah, he could do it and probably be very good at it or whatever, but it's not the best use of his time. He could be teaching high level mathematics to high level students. So,
well, especially given you have a 3-year-old or almost 4-year-old.
Yeah.
What I really enjoy, one of the parts which I've really loved about the fact that I've been at the gym, I didn't realize until, I don't know, 3-4 months ago, when I went off to Singapore for a holiday and found another gym there. And I am far from, I know, the average level of the blue belt in the gym, I would say. I'm like below the average blue belt level.
I've been harsh on yourself, Harry.
Well below. Like, yeah, we know who's there. I'm not looking forward to this banana crown. Sorry, my neck's sore. Out of my fault. But then when I went to this other gym in another country, and I was up against all these blue belts they were really, really easy. Like they were easier than some of your toughest white belts.
Yeah.
And then the purple belts there were kind of the level of like the lower end of the blue belts here.
Yeah. So, some gyms you can't fault because they're working with all they've got, right? And as well as the student, every student's on their own individual journey, but there's definitely an overarching trend where gyms give out belts way too easy, and yeah, it's just not good for the sport. And there's they call it sandbagging in jiu-jitsu when you intentionally hold someone back, but that's not what I don't think that's what I do. It's just a matter of, hey, well, if you're not good enough, you're not good enough. Unfortunately, there's certain requirements and there's certain standards that need to be met, and if you don't meet them, you don't just go, "Oh, I feel sorry for you, so here you go," right?
Is a participation award.
Think if it's and some people might argue that that's harsh, but I would argue that it's one of the best things about jiu-jitsu. And that's one of the reasons it's notoriously known as being a no bullshit martial art, because you can't just do your time and get your black belt. You can't just learn step 1, 2, 3 and get whatever. It's at the discretion of your instructor. And if you don't like your instructor's discretion, then you're free to go somewhere else, But I went out of my way to go to a gym with incredibly high standards that is notorious for it being difficult to progress through the belts, because I wanted to be of that standard. I mean, I've got students that I guarantee you, if they were at another gym, like I've got blue belts that I guarantee you, if they were at another gym, they would already be brown belts, but they wouldn't be very good brown belts, right? They're good blue belts, right? But yeah, so you see that sometimes. But on the flip side, you could go to some gyms that the white belts smash you, right? And I mean, that actually happened to one of our other members, Ollie. Ollie's a purple belt, not from me, like he's one of my students, but he was already a purple belt when I met him. And he came in, did a trial at our gym when he first moved to Sydney and enjoyed it, but he ended up living closer to a different gym. So he messaged me saying like, "Oh man, thanks for the trial, but I'm going to train at this gym. It's closer." I'm like, "Oh, you're welcome. No worries." And then he trained at this other gym, and he was like, so firstly, he was a purple belt. When he came and did the trial with us, he was getting beat up by our white belts, right? And then he went to this other gym and he was like, I'm beating up their brown belts. He goes, there's something wrong here. And a lot of people would have said, this is the gym for me. And they would have stayed at that gym. And Ollie would probably be wearing a black belt today, because this was a couple of years ago. But Ollie didn't want that. He was like, no. Like, if there's a gym where it's not like the white belts that were beating him up are like white belts that I've had for 10 years. And no, these were like white belts who had been training for a year, and he was like, okay, well, there's something wrong here. So I'm going to go to the gym where the white belts beat me up. Obviously, as you know, Ollie no longer gets beat up by white belts. Like, he very quickly rectified whatever was going on with his jiu-jitsu, and now he's a very good, legitimate purple belt. But yeah, it's standards, and every gym's going to have different standards. And even within the toughest gyms, there's still going to be some people who, everyone's on their own journey. So, but yeah, I remember you telling me that when you came back from Singapore, and you were like, man, I'm smashing all these dudes.
I'm finally a blue belt. Hooray. I never felt worthy of that blue belt till then. But I guess this gives credence to something which almost every guest has shared, almost everyone, that you got to surround yourself with the right people, and those are the people who hold you to high standards. And if you're around a whole bunch of people who are a whole lot better than you in that environment, or are just as good as you, and they keep wanting to get better as well, then you've got no choice but to keep up or give up.
Yeah, that's right. And I feel like a lot of the feedback I give to people well, we didn't mention it earlier, but for the listeners, obviously you know this, Harry, but myself and Kieran, one of the blue belts in the gym, we do a jiu-jitsu podcast together, the Beyond Jiu-Jitsu podcast, and we often get sent in questions and things like that, and or people asking advice or whatever it is. And a lot of the time, unfortunately, my advice is along the lines of get on board with how difficult it is, and that it's kind of a sink or swim or whatever. Like sometimes people, if you're having a hard time with it and, you're surrounding yourself, like you said, with people of a higher standard or whatever, like I'm never going to be giving out participation award belts, put it that way. And that was why, I moved to Brazil. I intentionally did that. When I left the gym that I started at in Canada, I got my blue belt just before I left, but even as a white belt, I remember there was only, I think, one blue belt and one purple belt who could beat me in the gym. And I was a white belt who had been training for less than a year. I was like, well, I'm not some prodigy, like there's no way, there's something wrong if that after, 10, 11 months of jiu-jitsu, I'm the best dude in the gym as a white belt. There's something wrong, I moved to Brazil and it was like, bam, you suck at jiu-jitsu. and I remember there was like, I trained every morning and every lunchtime, and the morning class was a slightly, not necessarily that, well, it was definitely a much easier class, I should say, but it's usually filled with the sort of people who train as a hobby and then go off to work. So from day one, I did relatively well in that morning class, but then the lunchtime class was the competition class. So that was all the active competitors. And man, in the beginning, I used to almost leave the gym in tears at how beat up I would get. And I remember my father-in-law, saying, it's like, well, you didn't move here to already be the best, and then, as time went on and then I started progressing through the belts and started winning gold medals and stuff like that. And, I remember him saying to me, see, now you're one of the best, right? Like let's throw another cliche in there, Harry. The higher the water, the higher the boat, right? Like you've just got to keep rising up above it. And I believe in that. So sometimes I'm often telling students or listeners of the podcast or whatever that they need to stop being like such a wuss. And it's very difficult. And you either step up or give up.
Yeah, I mean, I guess because most people are training jiu-jitsu, most people, at least in Australia, it's not to go into comps and to be world class. It's just because they're doing something as a hobby, they're having fun, they're enjoying it, and it can be demoralizing getting injured and continue to be in pain all the time because you're doing a combat sport, right? What's your choice?
Yeah, and I think as well, people who do it as a hobby, there's nothing wrong with doing it for a hobby as long as you're realistic with your expectations of the sport. I had an old training partner who would always get bummed when he would not do well in training against against a 20-year-old who's trying to pursue jiu-jitsu as his career. And this guy, the other dude's like a 40-year-old who trains twice a week. It's like, man, be realistic, right? You're never going to win against that dude. Often, even if you've been training for 10 years and he's been training for 5 years or 2 years or whatever, you still might not win. Like you've got someone who is dedicating their entire life to the sport. Even if take the age gap away, like even take 2 30-year-olds, but one is, pursuing jiu-jitsu as something like, a huge part of their life, and someone doing it as a hobbyist. As long as the hobbyist is realistic, and with what, their situation, it's fine. But it's when people are too hard on themselves, and I believe in being hard on yourself, by the way, but it's when people think that they're training once a week, twice a week, they should be able to hang in with the dudes who train 8 times a week. No, right? Like, I mean, in what world does that ever pay off, whether it's in a sport or not, you know? Oh man, like, it's so unfair that Harry's better at medicine than me. Like, I study once a week. Yeah, sure, Harry studies 10 times a week, but it's not fair. I should know as much medicine as he does. No, right? Like, you get in, you get out what you put in, right? So that's when that's when it can be hard. And another thing is that, and I think this could be applied to any form of success, I guess. So if we're talking about success, even within the sport of jiu-jitsu, what's the definition of success? Is it winning a competition? Is it earning money? Is it getting a belt, right? If we're talking about progression through the sport as belts, as a form of success, one of the things that people make the mistake of is they're putting in, like, X amount of effort, and then they hit that magic number of effort and they get their blue belt, for example, and they go, oh, so that's the amount of effort I need to put in to progress. It's like, no. Like, if you want to keep progressing, the level of effort continues to go up, right? Like, so they get that magical number and then they kind of like plateau, and then they wonder why the progression has stopped. It's like, well, because you stopped, the level has raised, the bar's been raised, so your effort needs to raise too, right? And I think that's, I don't know, let's use medicine as an example again. Like, I don't imagine many, like, 4-year med students or post-grad med students are sitting there being like, oh man, year 1 was way harder than this. No, it only ever gets harder, like, imagine a surgeon being like, it was way harder when I was just, putting some stitches in. Now, this triple bypass, so easy. Right? Like, it only ever gets harder and more demanding, and so sometimes hobbyists don't, they then get down on themselves because it's taking so long to progress, or they're not seeing the progression. And so, well, I mean, it's a very hard sport, man. And again, it goes back to what I argue is one of the most beautiful things about jiu-jitsu. It's the instructor's discretion, and it's their job to maintain the standards. But
I remember something really clearly you told me in the first week, I think it was. I'm like, I'm getting absolutely smashed. I don't know if I've got a future in this sport at all. Maybe I should just go back to boxing or something, or CrossFit. Just do that instead. I'll just go back to running. You're like, if you keep doing this for another 3 or 4 months, and then you'll see someone new come into the gym, and then you'll roll with them, and then you'll see your progress. But you can't measure your progress just off the back of what you've done so far. You got to look at your progress based off the last 3-4 months, and now seeing that last 2 years is huge.
Yeah, because I say that often to people, because unfortunately the thing about jiu-jitsu is your gauge for improvement is you could measure it in your theoretical knowledge, but really it's a physical sport. So it's how did you perform against your partner or opponent. So you're always comparing yourself to your training partners, and
they keep getting better
unfortunately
too,
they're getting better too. And when you're a beginner in the sport, by default, taking away physical attributes, and some people are more gifted than others, just to simplify it, by default, the least amount of jiu-jitsu and are the worst at jiu-jitsu out of anyone in that room, because you're the newest person there. So, of course, like, you can't do anything, right? Because everyone knows more than you. And then even after you've been training for 2-3 months, it's still the same people in the room who have still trained for longer than you and still know more than you. So you can still feel like you haven't done anything. And then, as you very clearly said, then a new person comes and joins, and now all of a sudden they're the shittest person in the room. And that's really when the penny drops and you go, oh my God, was I like that? Yeah, and you kind of look back at them and you go, surely I was never that bad at jiu-jitsu. Like, yes, you were. We all were.
We all were. I think that's an apt lesson for anything. It doesn't matter if you're trying to do better in your career or in particular area which you're trying to study or some other sport or hobby or anything. You got to be able to compare yourself with where you used to be as opposed to comparing yourself to how you are now.
Yeah, let's keep the cliches going. The whole, would the Adam of today beat the Adam of yesterday, or the Adam of 6 months ago? Like, am I a better version today of myself than I was yesterday? And
I mean, you've had a couple of surgeries.
I'm actually,
so maybe the 6 months ago would have been
right. Yeah, could we just go back a bit? Yeah, but Gordon Ryan is currently one of the most famous and best athletes in jiu-jitsu. And yeah, he has these little like 6 month checks. He kind of goes with, the Gordon Ryan today beat the Gordon Ryan of 6 months ago. And he goes, and because jiu-jitsu takes a long time to improve its stuff, techniques in jiu-jitsu. It's not as simple as just memorize this new formula or whatever. It's hard to explain to people who don't train it, but it's incredibly dynamic and complex, and it's not just about theoretical knowledge. There's so much intuition that goes into it, and there's a lot, right? So,
and it's not just mental.
That's
it's
right.
As well.
So in Brazil, it's colloquially referred to as a physical game of chess, but I like to better describe that as saying, kind of like, imagine it's like playing chess, but your opponent can move your pieces too, and you can move their pieces. Like, it's kind of like that, right? And yeah, so he goes with the Gordon Ryan today beat the Gordon Ryan of 6 months ago, and he goes, if the answer's no, then something's wrong in my training, and like I'm not doing something correctly, and I've got to change something. And if the answer's yes, then I go, cool, and then on to the next 6 months. And yeah, you could apply that to anything, right? In business, in your studies, in your relationships at home, in your whatever it is.
Anything. And I've really enjoyed finding all the analogies within jiu-jitsu.
I love analogies.
And then, I know, right? I've learned them all from you, Adam. But like finding the common themes that you're able to learn from jiu-jitsu, which is very much a mental sport as much as it's physical, and then being able to see how you can apply that in other areas. And like, there are just some of these amazing lessons. Like one of the ones which I love the most is this notion of always having like multiple plans of attack at the same time. So as a white belt, the only way you ever get a submission is if the one process with each transition works really nicely all the way to the one submission, which you know how to do in that particular instance. And it's like, yes, all those little things lined up perfectly in order to get to that one outcome.
Yeah.
And the reason why that doesn't work in blue belt or above is because then you're up against people who are better or who have also improved, and they know how to stop that one thing which you're doing. And I mean, I guess your style of jiu-jitsu definitely has multiple things which you're able to attack at any given time. It's like, if they do this, then that. If they do that, then that. Okay. And so then you keep moving that direction.
Yeah, those sort of, you can take that sort of approach and implement it into other aspects of your life. But I think some of the more even physiological benefits you get from jiu-jitsu in terms of, even though it's a sport and we do it for fun, it kind of really changes the way you see the world and stressful environments. When someone was 30 minutes ago, like, trying to choke you unconscious, and even though it's done in a very safe, controlled way with training partners that it's kind of, you can't really, I don't know, for me at least, makes it hard to get like stressed about other stuff. I think it's, I think it adds so much to your life, and there's so many lessons that come from it. But going back to what you said about analogies, the reason I like analogies so much is just because of the way I like to learn. I really benefit from having something have a direct correlation. And I'll give you an example. You often teach beginners in jiu-jitsu, like complete beginners in jiu-jitsu, you teach them self-defense first. Why is that? Well, because if you grab someone who doesn't train jiu-jitsu and you go, all right, we're going to start here in spider guard, holding the sleeve, foot on the bicep. They're going to do this. I'm going to do this. They're like, okay, A, why would I hold their sleeve? Why would I put a foot on the bicep? And why would he do that? None of this makes sense. But if you make a correlation, like they don't have to have ever been in a fight, but if you say someone tries to punch you and you do this, they can make a direct connection. And therefore it makes sense and it's more memorable. So I always like to draw analogies like that. Like, so I'm often describing jiu-jitsu techniques, and there's so many, I can't even think of one off the top of my head, but like something
motorbike.
Yeah, there's times I'll tell people to like, roll their wrist over, and I'll say it's like decelerating on a motorbike. So anyone who rides a motorbike is like, oh, like, and that's an instant, correlation and memorable. One that I don't mention it that often because living in Sydney, I've learned that not many of my students ride horses, but I grew up in the country riding horses. And if you've ever ridden a horse, and I said to you like, oh, it's like when you're doing a seated trot and you need to like, you can't just sit on a horse. For those who don't know, if you just sit on a horse, when a horse runs, right, trots, canters, right, they're different gaits. When a horse runs, if you just sit on it, you get bounced off the horse and you'll fall off it. Like you literally have to ride the horse and move your body and hips in a certain way in tune with the gait of the horse. And so it's very similar to when you have mount on someone, which is when you're, sitting on their belly or whatever. And so sometimes I'll say that, how when you're like riding a horse, you have to do this, like you have to feel what they're doing with their hips and your hips. And anyone who rides a horse, like it's an instant, they're like, oh man, it's the exact same thing, right? But as I said, being in Sydney, I've learned that not many of my students have ever ridden a horse. So that analogy kind of doesn't work very well. But I think that's why I really like analogies, because you can draw direct connections, and that direct connection and correlation, I think it helped. It's at least how I like to learn. But then I have people who don't even necessarily learn that way come back to me and be like, oh man, I was rolling this, and then I remembered like on the motorbike. And I'm like, yeah, bro, like that's why I enjoy it.
You got it.
And they're also funny. Sometimes they're not all good. I'll say that. Not all but when they're good, they're good.
It's like when you're going to get a haircut and forget about that analogy. It doesn't work.
I just think it does such a good job to solidify it in your brain. Yeah. So people will ask. So again, I'm trying to describe this for people who know nothing about jiu-jitsu, but there's certain positions where it matters the order of operations, and over under is one of them. So people will ask in a position, they'll be like, wait, which one's on top? And I'll say like, well, look back at the other one. If the other one is under, then this one will be over. But then I'll do more than that. And I'll say it's like, lattice work, or plaid, right? Or then I like to refer to, or like pie crust on an apple pie, over, under. And then as soon as you describe it like that, they have a visual representation, because everyone can picture like that lattice work that's in an outdoor garden or a pie, and it helps a lot. So things like, it's definitely consistent. And as you know, there are plenty of positions where you need to know, like the over, under, right? And then with time, it becomes autonomous. You don't even think about it.
Yeah, not autonomous to me yet.
I mean, I still think about pie a lot, so don't worry.
Just any excuse to think about pie. Why Adam does BJJ. But then there are also these like beautiful other metaphors which I keep seeing coming from it, like just cutting the angle, like just
how
always finding a new way to approach a situation, or just doing the finishing touches as well.
Yeah, it's all in like, cutting the angle is a good one because it's physically applicable in jiu-jitsu, but it's also theoretically applicable, as in like the chess side of it, cutting the angle, meaning to come at it from a different angle, take a different approach, right? Circle around, whatever. And man, maybe that's you. Maybe you work in IT and you're stuck on a coding problem or something, and you could, a similar thing, right? Cutting that, like, come at it from a different angle and, look at it from a different point of view or whatever. And a lot of this, I don't know, like, it's interesting to have it pointed out because I don't necessarily sit down and think about it before I say something like that. But, when you do sit and think, like, that has impacts on my daily life without even realizing it.
Even as simple as changing a baby's nappy, you got to control the hips, not the legs.
Yeah,
really important.
Funny, right? Yeah. Man, there's things like that. Honestly, like when Atlas, like my son, won't lie flat for me, like, I'm like, well, if I just pin that shoulder, I don't need to like hold just that one. He can't move. Like.
Or holding my daughter and she's trying to get away, or she's crying or whatever, and it's just not the right time to let her go. Learn how to do a gable grip.
That's right.
It works a lot better. Or teaching your child how to do a gable grip just to hang around the neck, because you train jiu-jitsu, you don't mind that pressure on your neck. You're right with it.
Yeah.
There you go. You can hold on that way while we go through the shopping
center.
That is
don't you find though the actual training jiu-jitsu makes you incredibly more physically resistant to discomfort? And it's one of my favorite analogies actually is drawing parallels between surfing and jiu-jitsu. So in the beginning, students will often really struggle with the discomfort and the pressure of jiu-jitsu, because when you think about it, if you don't train jiu-jitsu or wrestling, some type of grappling, and like prior to jiu-jitsu, when would you say was the last time you had someone forcibly like lie down on top of you or hold you down? Like for the average person, they would say, oh, not since I was a kid, So beginners, people new to jiu-jitsu, often struggle with that discomfort, and they tap, being, the tapping being when you give up in jiu-jitsu and you concede defeat. People give up just from the pressure because they're not used to it. And I often give the analogy of, you actually get used to it. It's kind of like if you start learning how to surf, man, you only need to be under the water for like 2 seconds and you think you're going to drown, right? Because you're not used to being forcibly held under the water by a wave. But yes, it's a little different because obviously you can physically drown, right? There's no oxygen down there, but obviously with experience comes the ability to remain calm when you've come off a wave and you're getting tumbled around under the water, So training jiu-jitsu definitely makes you more physically resistant. Like things as simple as that, as having your kid hang from your neck, I bet you is going to bother your wife far more than it bothers you. Okay, it's still uncomfortable for you, but you kind of like whatever,
Like I could stay here all day until I tell.
Like it's not even tight.
It's only got like 13 kilos hanging on me. I got this. No, that's cool. Okay. And so maybe I'll give a quick summary of like the high level points of what you shared, and then you can give your thoughts or anything else that you want to add on the end of that. And maybe you'll even be able to share your thoughts for anyone who's thinking about doing jiu-jitsu at some stage.
I like it.
But we started talking about success and defining it, and you basically said, as a nice cliche, it's about happiness. But that's just because you're not financially driven. Even though you've got a wife and kid and a business to run and everything, you're kind of not so bothered about the finances because you love doing it. And I guess if you're really bothered by the finances, you wouldn't have stayed in Brazil for a whole 5 years just to come back to Australia to have nothing to your name. It's got to be something, right? And so jiu-jitsu for you is not just a career or a job or a business. It's also kind of a lifestyle. And it gives you a wonderful excuse to be able to give a million analogies every single day. And so you can kind of make money and be happy while you're doing it. And you've built this amazing community, and you're obviously quite social. And you've got these people in this community that you've curated and you've created to who you really enjoy being with. And so you went overseas, and because you need to go to Canada right away, or you were going there. By the way. And then you decided, well, it's time that I actually train properly. I don't want to stay in these kind of crappy gyms where I'm the best person or one of the best people in the gyms while I'm still a relative beginner. I may as well just go to the most difficult, hardest place to go over in Brazil, literally doing Brazilian Jiu Jitsu in Brazil to then go and compete in Brazilian nationals and in the PANs as well. And it took you a while to be accepted as a foreigner, to be more of a local, and then you had a whole bunch of injuries, and then you didn't end up moving your way towards being on the international stage in fighting. But you wanted to keep training, and so you opened up your own gym. And I think the key message which you shared there is that most people are like, how could you live your life going through injuries and constantly being under the literal pressure from other people on whether it's a physical weight down on you, or if it's like a torque in your knee or your heel or your ankle, and you're constantly in all this pain. And so, well, the physical pretty much for me is the same as the mental for most other people. It's the same in my mind. It's just some people will just be too stressed out by things. And so they don't progress, like they don't deal with the stress they have. They just decide to put more stress on them. And for me, it's pretty much the same, although you're trying to manage the physical, right? And then we spoke about a whole bunch of analogies and some of the things of everything from riding a horse to surfing, and pie.
Don't forget
apple
the pie.
Don't forget the apple pie. And what I was actually reminded of as well is that while we were talking about making sure that you're around the same standards of people, like people who are pursuing the same standards that you choose to pursue as well. And you also mentioned that you can't compare yourself against the people that you started training with because they're getting better at the same time, unless they're not. Like unless you're like some of the people in the gym who are doing 2 classes a day, 5 days or 6 days a week, and they're obviously moving along faster than anyone who's doing 1 or 2 classes a week. Stop looking at me like that. Thank you. And I think I've got myself to
you're doing great
with that. But while you're comparing yourself with those people, it's much better to be able to see your progress by comparing yourself against who you were a long time ago. And the best way to see that is to see other people who are at the level that you were, and then see how you perform against them. And I think you've drawn a parallel to that in the past as well, of like the game of jiu-jitsu has evolved a lot. And what was required 20 years ago to be best in the world would consider you kind of like as a keen hobbyist today.
Yeah, and you've actually just reminded me of another example. I don't know if this definition falls under an analogy, but yeah, you've reminded me of something which is, sometimes I'll teach beginners something that is relatively difficult. Let's say something like inverting, which is where you roll upside down across the back of your neck and shoulders. And that didn't exist, 20 years ago. I remember when it first became a thing. I was probably a blue belt or a purple belt I was a blue belt when it first became a thing. And I was looking at black belts who had never done it before. And I often say, just because it's like a basic, simple, fundamental part of jiu-jitsu doesn't mean it's easy. And for anyone who knows anything about skateboarding, for example, It's like, because I grew up skateboarding, I'll say something like, back in the 80s, if you could do a kickflip, you're pretty much a professional skateboarder. Whereas nowadays, if you do a kickflip down a 10 set of stairs, you're just another 8-year-old kid. Like it's just this, it's just progressed so much, the sport, and jiu-jitsu is becoming like, to make it on the professional scene nowadays, man, yeah, it's still a niche sport, but it's so incredibly competitive. It's almost becoming like Formula One. If you want to make it as a Formula One driver and you weren't racing go-karts when you were 5, forget about it. Like it's not happening. And jiu-jitsu is becoming very similar. Like if you want to go on to become a world champion, man, I hope you started when you were a wee little one, because it's crazy how difficult it's becoming.
Although you've got some people in the gym who are like ex-military who have the conditioning and some sort of training that they've probably got a chance.
There's always going to be exceptions to the rule, but it's kind of like you can't really look at them. It's impressive to look at them, but it's like the people who argue like, Bill Gates didn't finish university. Like, yeah, neither did that dude over there, and he's eating out of the trash can. Like, right.
Yeah. I know exactly what you mean. And it's easy to compare yourself to those people because they're just exceptionally better. They're so much more focused and dedicated, and they've got the right conditioning for it, and they're younger and they're able to dedicate their life to it as well. It's like, it's like, well, at least I'm going to be better in my field.
Yeah. And yeah, that's right. And one of the, if I could, leave with a final sort of mantra, not that I live by a mantra, but, I honestly believe that everything in life comes at a cost, and it just depends whether you're willing to pay whatever the price is. So if we go back to talking about the guy from AliExpress or whatever, the cost that he regrets paying is time with his family and kids. Often in professional sports, it's very well known that the cost is not being able to socialize with your friends. You can't go out partying and drinking. If you want to be a professional athlete who's like, for example, the guy who won the world championships this year in jiu-jitsu, like they have multiple weight divisions, but one of the guys is 18. Man, when I was 18, I was out going to the pub, like getting drunk every weekend with my friends. Like, you think he's doing that? No. And so he's willing to pay that price. I don't know much about his personal life, but it wouldn't be far-fetched to think that he doesn't have a girlfriend or whatever else, like maybe he does, but you know what I'm saying? Like a lot of, and everything in life has a particular price. For example, for me to achieve what I wanted, the price I had to pay was moving countries, living in relatively poor conditions in Brazil, but I was willing to pay that price. I've got a friend who's also a black belt now. He wasn't willing to pay that price. He also moved from a first world country. He moved down to Brazil from Canada, and he only made it about like 2 or 3 months in Sao Paulo, and he was like, nah, man, I'm going home. So for him, it wasn't worth the price of admission. So yeah, that's sort of like and sometimes when I do find myself spiraling down that, comparing yourself to someone else, it's kind of like here we go. Let's put a cliche and a mantra together. It's kind of like the cliche of, don't focus on the negatives, focus on the positives. So sometimes when I see myself, let's just give a very clear example. Oh man, that 18-year-old who won worlds, and oh man, I didn't win worlds. I'm so shit. Blah, 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 all that. But then I go, yeah, but I've also got, a business. I'm able to pay my bills doing jiu-jitsu. I've got a wife. I've got a 3-year-old boy. I've got an awesome dog. I've got this community that, like, I've got all this other stuff that, that this person might not have, probably doesn't have. Maybe they do. I don't know. But you know what I mean? Like, so, yeah, that's kind of my philosophy, if you will.
Cool. Thanks for your time, Adam, and for sharing your journey and your experience.
Harry, thanks so much. I hope I didn't talk too much. You had some good questions, bro. It was a pleasure.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of Success with Purpose, and I also hope that you feel capable to apply some of the perspectives and learnings from this episode in your own life. If you enjoyed this conversation, be sure to like and subscribe below. And until next time, live with purpose.